This is going to be another Ford 1700 maintenance video. In this case, replacing the fan and alternator belt on the front of the engine. Now the reason I'm doing this is because a couple weeks ago I was working with my dad in the woods. We were dragging some trees out and I went over a stick and had a little incident. The front tire kicked the stick right up into the fan belt and it actually took the belt off the pulleys in the woods and did some damage to the belt. Fortunately, we were able to put it back on. Turns out the back end of a scrench is the right size, 13 millimeters is the size of the nut, but the back end of the scrench was the right size to be able to loosen the bolts in the alternator, to be able to adjust it, to put the belt back on and retighten it. I have a new belt. We're going to install that today. It's a little hard to get a good angle here, but we got a bolt right there. That's 13 millimeter up top. That's on the swing arm for adjusting the belt tension. And then if we jump down bottom, you can see we've got a bolt on each end there for the pivot. So these just need to be loosened, although the pivot, typically, even if that's tight, you still can get enough swing to adjust the top. So I've got a 13 millimeter wrench here. And all we've got to do is loosen this up such that we can pivot this alternator over. And now we've got the slack in the belt that we need to be able to pop it off of the pulley. I probably should mention that before I started, I disconnected the battery here. That comes off. And gotta get underneath. Not a lot of clearance down bottom on that crankshaft pulley. Then of course the hardest part is you gotta get outside of the fan, which carefully flip that over the blades. Okay. So here we go. This is the belt we took out. Here's the new one. It's a 17440 from Napa. This is a whopping $5.49 in 2024 when I got this. So really not that expensive. And as we look at this belt, you can kind of see the teeth got kind of chewed up when it jumped off, and the surface of it is definitely a little worn anyway, so it was time. I will hang on to this, though, as a backup. This belt is 44 1/4 inches or so around the outside, and then it's a 1/2 inch thick for someone who's looking for the dimensions. And to get it back on, we start with the hardest part, getting it over the fan. If I wanted to try and undo all the rusty screws to take the shield off, I suppose it would be a little bit easier, but I don't. Did we get there? Yes. Okay. Now we just have to route around these pulleys. All right. So on the crankshaft, in there. It's tight on the hydraulic pump on the right side of the machine. There's not a lot of clearance to get that in there. I may have to go on that side. There it goes. All right, it's in there now. And that is swung over as loose as this can go. I'm gonna kind of stretch it into there. And get fully in the groove on that crank pulley. All right, now we just need to tighten it up. So to tighten it, we just pry the alternator back out. And I can pull it by hand. And I'm just gonna snug it up a little bit, not all the way, so that we can get this tight enough. All right. Now the idea here is you want to take thumb pressure midway, and if you put 20 pounds, you want it to deflect a 1/2 inch. Well, the manual says 7/16 to 9/16, but we'll call a 1/2 inch. And so we're not quite there. That's a little too much deflection still. So, see if we can get a little bit more on it. I recognize that it's going to stretch here a little bit in the first hours that it's run. Now, yeah, that's pretty good. Still may be a little bit loose, but I think I'll run it a little. Let it stretch if it's gonna, and then try and snug it up again. The last thing you want is for it to be too tight, because you'll stress the bearings here at the water pump and on the alternator. All right, just like that, the machine's ready to go back to work.